Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sew Together Tuesday. I'm Teresa Coates. I'm the National Educator for Shannon Fabrics, and we're here today to do another little sewing project. Today's project is our Sweet 16 pillow, and it uses 16 little squares. And you may have seen this one before if you've ever gotten one of our little charm packs that we used to give away at consumer shows. You've gotten that, and it has a version of this pattern in there. So today we're going to go through that. But it's a great way to use your scraps, and that's what I wanted to show you. We're actually going to be working with our cabin quilt print today, which has little squares printed on it, but I'm going to show you another version at the end that you can use it with just a bunch of scraps, and it's a great project for that. So if you've been making some different cuddle projects, quilts and pillows and that sort of thing, make sure that you save your scraps. You can do this in 5-inch squares, 6-inch squares, whichever you'd like. It'll just make a bigger pillow depending on what size your squares originally start with. So to start with, we're going to need our fabric and all sorts of tools. So I've got those over here for you. This is our cabin quilt print, which is actually sort of like a cheater cloth. So all of these squares are printed on here. We're going to be using the scarlet version today, and I've got it partially sewn together here so we can put it together a little bit faster. But we have a couple different versions of this, and I really love all the different squares that are in it. So we have this fabric, and then I have my Wonder Clips. I've got my Clover flower head pins. I am using the Superior So Fine today, and Schmetz stretch needles, a 90-14 stretch. I've got my rotary cutter and my stiletto, which I'm going to use like crazy today, Vamore scissors, and a ruler. Okay, so to get started, we're going to need to cut our squares. So I've got some right here for you. All right, so what I did is I took these original size squares out of the fabric, and I cut them, and they're not quite square. So I cut them to 4 3/4 inches, because that's what I could get square out of each of those. So it's sort of a weird size, but it works as long as they're all square. So I'm going to cut this from the back, and I'm just going to mark this on here. So here's my 3/4 mark and 3/4 mark at the bottom there. Okay, I'm going to line this up, and I'm just going to trim this off. Okay, so now I've got a square just like all the rest. Okay, so if I were starting this project, what you're going to do is you're going to lay out all of these squares, and I have some extras here that I can show you. But we would lay these all out. We'd figure out how we wanted our pattern to go, and then what I do, and I'll show you, is I take a little picture of it. So this is the picture. Oops, here we go. This is the picture I took of this before I put the other pieces together. And this is so I can know how I want it to go together. The thing to remember when you're putting these pillows together is that when we're done, the front of it is going to be this part right here. Okay? So when we're finished, you'll see that this part will work together to be our middle part. So keep that in mind, that this will be the front, and then these edges are actually the back. You'll see when it comes together how it works, but I like to do this first. I take a picture of them so I can get them back in the right order. So you can see that's what I've got here, except I've got it backwards. See? That's why I have to do these things. So I'm going to sew my red to my deer, and then I've got these two sewn together. So we're going to do, we would cut out all of the squares, lay it out how we wanted to, and then sew them together. So first we're going to sew them in pairs. Okay, so I'm going to put these two together, and I'm going to move that ruler. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just going to pin these right along this edge that I want to sew, and I want to make sure the nap's going the same direction. Okay, with this hide is what I'm using for the red. It isn't quite as important because it's sort of swirly and it goes in different ways, but if I were using the just another cuddle, I would want to do that. Okay, so I'm going to sew these together on the machine. Okay, so I've got my walking foot, and I have it set at a 3 stitch length, just a straight stitch. And I'm just going to stitch right along that edge, right, I'm going to use my walking foot. And I've ticked my needle over just a little bit because I'm going to use just shy of a 1/2 inch seam allowance because I've got smaller squares here. But you would use a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the larger ones. Back stitch. I'm just going to stitch right along here. And I'm going to tuck that under, make sure it's nice and flat. Okay. Take that pin out because it wants to bulge it around, and I don't want to do that. Okay, I'm going to go all the way across to the end, back stitch, cut my threads, and pull it out. All right. So now I've got 2 of these pairs sewn together, okay? And as I showed you in my little patchwork, or on my photograph, I saw this is how it goes together. So now I'm going to sew these 2 together. Okay, so I like to do these in rows. You could do them in pairs and then rows, however you want to do it, whatever is your favorite way of sewing squares together like that. Okay, if I do them 1 row at a time, I tend to get less lost and sew them together wrong. Okay, all right, back to the machine. Okay, sew those. I'm going to take that pin out so it doesn't get sewn over. Okay. I'm just going to sew right along this edge again, using my stiletto to sort of feed it in. Okay, and keep it nice and even. Now back stitch again, and cut my thread. All right, so now I have 4 pieces sewn together. So I have a whole row. Okay, so I can reference my picture again and see that that's exactly what my top row was supposed to look like. Okay, so now I've done that with all the 3 rows below it. So I can put all of these together now. Okay, so I've got this row and then these rows that I can sew them all together. So I'm going to fold this over and I'm going to pin this, and I want to make sure that my seams are matching. Okay, because you're going to notice that on the front. So I'm going to do just the typical quilter thing and pin right there at the corner. Okay, and I'm going to pin it in this first seam allowance to keep those both flat. Okay, and then I'll take that pin out as I get there. All right, I'm going to do the same thing here. That got sewn funky. Okay, open that up. I'm just going to pin it here. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to actually pin in between, as you might imagine if you've watched any of my other videos, just to keep it in check here so that it doesn't move too much on me. It doesn't curl up in the seam allowances. All right. Okay, so I've got all the intersections pinned. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to put 1 pin at the end because that's where I want to start. Then I'm going to put 1 in here, and I'm going to put it down a little bit so that hopefully I can just sew past it. And put a wonder clip up here. Okay, when I'm sewing the 2 cuddles together, that works pretty well. Sometimes if I'm using the luxe cuddles, it can be a little bit more difficult because the pile is there and it makes it thicker. But we're going to give it a shot. Okay, and see what happens. All right. And I'm just going to put a couple clips in here because I want to hold it pretty well. That edge will want to sort of roll on you when you're sewing, so clipping it will help a lot to keep it where you want it to be and not have to fight it. Okay, let's take this back, grab my stiletto. Okay, I'm going to put this underneath the foot, and I'm going to make sure that my back part is pulled up. That tends to happen a lot, is that it'll get folded down into there, so you just got to be careful. All right. We're going to go forward. We're just going to take this nice and slow and sew all along this edge. Okay. So for me, I really love my stiletto for this. If you have an awl, you can use something like that. There's a few different tools that work really well to push your fabric through, keep it even. This one is the one from by Annie, and it really is my personal favorite. Okay, and I'm going to keep an eye on this and make sure that I'm not going to sew over that pin, but I can see where the needle's coming down. I'm just going to let it do that. Okay, I'm going to take this one out though because I don't ever want to sew over the metal part of the pins. Okay, it's really important. I know a lot of people have gotten away with it for a long time, but I promise that when you sew over them and they break, it's not good. Okay, we're just going to keep sewing. Okay, and like I said, you're going to do this for each row. So you can see I've already done this twice before, and this is the third one. So this puts all 4 rows together. All right, I'm just going to stitch right along here. Okay, and you can see the pins over here really help a lot to keep it from shifting too much, and then the extra little wonder clip at the top really does its job. Okay, those are off just a little bit. I don't think it should matter. Okay. All right, we're going to take that out, come back over here, and I'll take out the pins that I left in there. Put them back on my pin cushion. And you can see this now is the layout for the paper that I made earlier. I can see that it works. It's the same layout. I got it back together in the order that I wanted it to, which is great. Okay, so once you've got this 16 patch here, what we're going to do is we're going to fold it in half this way, right sides together, and we're going to pin the ends here. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make sure that these joins match and push the seam allowances to either side. Okay, and when I sew these, I want to sew from this, the fold up. All right, so I'm going to make sure I've got plenty over there for my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, and I'm just going to pin that. I'm going to pin this. Keep those all where I want them to be. I'm going to throw a couple of little wonder clips on there just for good measure. Make sure nothing moves. Okay. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other end. Okay, but this one, I want to flip it over because I want to sew again from the fold over here. So I'm going to put it together that way so that the pins are on the top. Okay, get those to match as well as I can. Okay, stick some pins in here. And I can see that this one is a little bit longer, and I don't really mind too much. We'll just work that out as we sew it together. Okay, sometimes that happens, as you can see. Okay, that's my end, and I want to keep that in place. I'm going to pin it here, and a couple little clips. All right, so now we'll go sew these ends from the fold to the raw edge. Okay, so I'm going to stick that in here. And I'm going to start this just past the seam. Okay, because that's where I want it to catch that seam that I sewed before, but I don't necessarily want to sew all of that down flat back there. Okay, so I'm just going to come right along here. When I get up to here again, I'm going to take my pin out. And then I'm just going to keep sewing straight, and I'm going to aim for this end over here. Okay, and that'll take care of that little bit that's extra. I'll straighten this all out again. Okay. Push that underneath there. So I catch it. Okay, and we're going to cut it, and I'm just going to do the other end. Okay, I'll flip it around here. And sew this end. Just going to sew right along this side. And I'm giving it a little bit extra on that seam allowance because I remember that's where it was a little short on the other side. So I'll make sure and catch all that. Okay, I'm going to move that so I can pull this and keep it nice and flat as it comes in here. All right, and then we're going to get to the end, back stitch, and cut my thread. Okay. All right, so now we've got here, and I've got a couple extra little pins in. I'm going to take these guys out. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So now we have like a little pouch here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to flip this the other way. So what I want to do is grab these the middles of the sides. Okay, these are the center seams. So if I lay this down flat, you're going to see this is the center seam, and this is the center seam, and I'm going to turn it like this. Okay, that can get a little bit tricky. Let me do that again for you. All right, so this is where we've sewn it all together. Okay, here's my middle seam and my middle seam, and I'm just going to turn this like this and bring these together. Okay, so now this is my middle seam. This is the back center seam. All right, I'm going to pin that. And that's a little bit long, so I'm just going to work that in and get it nice and straight. I'm going to match up these side seams, or seam allowances, whatever. Pin that in there. Then I'm going to put some pins and clips in here, just like we did before. Okay, this seems to be the easiest way for me to get these fairly straight. I like this project because it's a great one to do with kids, especially because you don't have to be super careful, and it just works out almost always. So this is a great one for that sort of project. Okay, we're going to match up this side. Now what I need to do is I need to leave a little hole in here for where we're going to stuff it. So if you want to do a larger one, which I'll show you, you can actually use a pillow form in it, and you'll leave a larger hole that you can put the pillow form in. But this guy we're just going to stuff, and so I'm going to actually leave a little bit bigger hole than that. And I'm going to sew almost to here, because really, I'm actually going to stick a pin in there. And then I'm going to stick a pin in here, because this is where I'm going to sew from. So I'm going to sew from here to the end, and from the end to here. Okay, and then this is going to be my little hole for stuffing. And that should be big enough that it should be fine. Okay, so let's do that. All right. I got quite the collection of pins and wonder clips over here. All right, so I'm going to put that up. Get that underneath there, grab my stiletto, and keep sewing. All right. All right, so we're just going to come right along this edge. Get this nice and flat. This is going to be weird over here, and that's okay. I think that guy might have to come out. Okay. There we go. All right. So we're going to keep going. We just want to keep this part that we're sewing nice and flat, and the other part can be bulky over there and turned, and it's all right. Okay, so we're going to sew past there, and this is the pin that I'm aiming for to stop at. Okay, so we're just going to keep moving. Pin that out, and I'm going to go right along this edge. That out from underneath there. I feel it's a little bulky. I don't want to accidentally stitch that side down. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop, reverse, and then I'm going to turn right off the edge. Okay. And I'm going to clip it. All right, so then I'm going to just start down just a little bit and keep going. All right, so basically I'm just going to start again here. So I'm going to take that pin out, stick it in, and I'm going to sew down what I think is probably about 1/2 inch. Okay, and I'm just going to eyeball that. Oops. You could mark it, but it's really not that important. You could just even it up if you need to, and then stitch all along this side. Okay. I'm going to stitch all the way to that seam. Get it nice and flat as it comes there. Back stitch and cut my thread. All right. Okay, so now we've got this funky looking thing, which doesn't really look like a pillow until I open it up and sort of get it flat, and you can see how this is going to work together. So we want to get all of these seams as open as possible, which we've done pretty okay there, and then I'm just going to turn this inside out from here. I don't need to clip these corners because they're going to get filled in with stuffing and be just fine, okay, but I'm just going to shove them out as I go, just because it's a little bit easier for me that way. Okay. And I'm just going to keep turning. Okay, and as I get over to here, I'm going to shove this out, turn that inside out. Okay. And then we're just going to pull it out. All right. Okay, and I've got that last one. I'm going to poke that corner. All right, and now we have our little pillow. Ta-da! Okay, so now we have it like this. And I've got a little hole in the back. There we go. So you could see the way that this was done in my original, that these two, okay, these two end up being these middle ones here. And then these three across were from this matching into these. Okay, so this came into these and this went into these. So if you can figure this out beforehand, you can make some pretty interesting designs. I like the way that they kind of different every time. All right, so let me get some stuffing. Okay, and I've got the polyfill. It's royal silk. Let me show you the bag. That's what I'm using today. I really like it. You're welcome to use any sort of polyester fiber fill that you like. Okay, so I'm just gonna shove this in here. I like this one because it doesn't get all clumpy like some of them. But really, it's up to you. Okay, whatever you can find at your local quilt shop, that's what you can get. So I just sort of break it up a little bit and then shove it on in. And we're just gonna fill this guy right up. And I might have to trim some threads. Oh, no. Okay. It doesn't take very much. These little guys take like a half a bag. The larger ones will take more, or like I said, you can use the pillow form, which works pretty well. So the one that I did with a 6-inch square takes a 14-inch pillow form. I'll show you that as soon as I'm done here. Okay. And how much you want to stuff it is really, up to you. You could stuff it pretty hard, you can stuff it pretty soft depending on what you want to use it for. This little size is nice for just like a little kid's bed, or accent pillows on your bed. If you want to, one of the things that I really recommend is that when you're doing projects like you're doing the blankets, if you do like a little self-binding blanket, you can easily use these. You could totally just use 2 prints. You can sort of see with these grays, if you used one print here and then one print for all of these, it'd be a really super cute little checkered pillow. Really easy to do, and you could do that like with your self-binding blanket. Use those 2 fabrics and make yourself a cute little coordinating pillow to go with it. It makes a great gift. Okay, and then of course with any of our quilt kits or the strip quilts, which we'll be talking about next week, if you have any extras on that, you can totally use that for these little pillows too. Okay, so we're getting that pretty full. I'm going to give it one more good little handful here. Okay, and I'm going to shove that up into the corners. Okay, and you can see on some of these the nap got stuck down into the seam, and you can go along with your stiletto and pull those up. Okay, I see some right there. And I can just pull that right up with the stiletto. Okay, and pulls it right up out of the seam. It makes it look much nicer. Okay, so the biggest thing is to make sure that you get down into those corners, otherwise your pillow will have little dog ears basically, where the corners aren't stuffed and they sort of flop down, which isn't as cute. All right, so once we've got this stuffed the amount that we want to, turn it over, check it out, Squish it around. I think that's pretty good. I can go ahead, especially if I haven't gotten that corner right, I'm totally going to put a little button on here, or I can leave it off. This one I'm going to leave off, and I'll show you the other one that I did that has a little button. So then we're just going to take this back and we're going to sew it closed. Okay, so let me find my needle. Okay, I've got some black thread in here so you can see it, and weirdly it's all going to hide in here anyway, and nobody will be able to see it afterward. Okay, and I just do a little ladder stitch here. Oops. Let's see if I can get that wedged in there better. Okay. All right, and then I'm just going to do a little ladder stitch here, back and forth, to bring that closed at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, you can whip stitch that if it's easier for you, and you'll just come right along here. You can see I'm taking kind of big stitches. It doesn't matter too much. If you want to be more careful, you can take teeny tiny stitches. I haven't had too much of a problem. If you were giving this to a little kid who is really going to abuse it like kids can do, you might want to stitch this with a little bit tighter stitches so they can't pop them when they're, jumping on the pillow or whatever craziness they do. And like I said, this pillow is great. You can see how fast it is. It's great for scraps, and it's really flexible. So if you had larger ones even, you could do that. It just depends on what size scraps you have. I will show you the one in just a second here. It's made with 6" and how much bigger it is. All right. So you can see I can't see any of the black thread. It's not super nicely sewn, but it's going to be strong enough to do for what I want it to do. Just really just to be a little sample. Okay, I'm going to knot this. Okay, what I do is I knot it a couple of times, and then I just go hide thread elsewhere. Oh, my thread is getting short. Okay, stick it through there, pull it down, get it nice and tight, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it out somewhere else. Okay, then I trim that thread off. All right, there we go. Okay, and I can squish it all up, get it nice and even for it. Okay. All right, so once we've got that finished, we've got a couple of different pillows, and so this is the little one that I just did. Okay, super duper cute. It's got the little sort of a harlequin, I guess, look on this side. Adorable, love it. Okay, this one doesn't have, I didn't do the little button inside, but this one I did. So this is one that I did earlier and stuck a big button inside, and you can see it makes it a little bit more like a tufted pillow, which works really well. And this one I just used a really big oversized, like 1.5" black button. Okay, then the other one that I did, I used the 6" squares. Okay, so this is much larger than this little guy that we just did. Okay, so this one is almost 5" squares. This one is 6" squares. So you can see it gets a lot bigger, the bigger squares that you do. So 6" is really like a perfect size, I think, for a throw pillow. It's a great scrappy little thing that you can use. So you can see it's a great project to do, super duper easy, and one that you can use with all sorts of different scraps. Doesn't have to be all coordinating fabrics or even just the 2 fabrics. You can really go kind of hog wild on it, which would be fun. So anyways, there's our project, super duper easy. I hope that you give it a try. Show me pictures when you finish. Next week we'll be back, and we're going to be doing the strip quilt. So if you've ever bought one of our quilt kits and you've been wanting to know how to put it together and weren't quite sure, this is your opportunity. We'll be back, and I'll show you some tips on putting those together the easiest way possible. And yeah, so look for that email. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, make sure you do it. You can also check out our other videos from Sew Together Tuesday on our YouTube channel and our Facebook. And I hope to see you next week. Thanks so much for coming. Bye-bye. Thank you to all of our vendor partners for making such great products that make sewing with Cuddle Minky and Embrace Double Gauze easy. See you next week. And until then, happy sewing.